In this video, we're going to take a look at using paint effects as well as the projection and cloning tools. Let's first start with using paint effects. So here we have our rust, and we've been working on this mask. Here we have our effect stack. Now I mentioned in a previous video that with the mask selected, you can paint right in the mask. However, it's always better to use a paint effect for this. So with the mask selected, I'm going to come over here to my effects, and I'm going to add this paint. So now I have this paint effect. This paint effect is going to work just like a standard paintable layer that we covered in the previous video. So here I'm going to come over to my shelf and I'm going to use this Dirt 2 preset. And here I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control and my right mouse button and move up to set the hardness here for this alpha. And then Control, right mouse button, left to right to adjust my size. So here I have my size. Now with this paint effect, here we have the paint controls and we also have our material. So let's come over here to our material. You'll notice that because we're working here with a paint effect and a mask, the material is just this grayscale value. And so we have black and white. So black is going to equate to transparency, so we can use this for a hand-painted mask for all of the effects that we have underneath of this. Now a keyboard shortcut, I can just hit the X key to toggle between white and black states. So here, if we have this at full white, we're going to reveal the mask. So here you can see that I'm actually just painting more value, or I can simply hit the X key to toggle this, and then just erase some of this out, or mask, or better said, mask some of this out. So now I can go through the process of just using this paint effect to start to paint specific edge detail. I've been saying throughout this entire course that we've been working procedurally here with all of these generators and these grunge maps. But now here at that last 10% before we finish the texture, we're now starting to add things like paintable effects. So we can go in by hand and start to fine tune the level of grunge and wear that we want to have for this particular mask. Now with this paint effect, I also have full control over the blending modes as well as the opacity. You can also double click and we can rename this so that we can quickly see what this paint effect is controlling. So here I can just type in edge wear. Now you can rename paint effects and you can also rename fill layers as well. So the next thing I'd like to cover is how to use the projection tool. So in previous video, we created a rust material and then we set up an effect stack here using procedurals and mask generators to create a mask to reveal that rust material. However, let's take a look at how to use a projection tool to actually project our material through painting. So to start, I'm going to create a new standard layer and I'm going to come over here to the toolbar and I'm going to enable the projection tool. Now, the projection tool is going to work somewhat like the stencil that I showed in the previous video. The difference is that the projection tool has a full material, so we can project across multiple channels instead of just a single grayscale channel. So for this, I'm going to enable my color, height, rough, and my ambient occlusion. Now let's click the base color button, and you can see that I'm filtering rust, and I started to filter with the word texture, and so this is going to filter for us these textures that we imported in a previous video. So here I'm going to set my base color to the base color, and for the height we'll choose the height, ambient occlusion, we're going to choose the ambient occlusion, and then here for roughness I just have kind of a high value set. Now in the viewport we can start to see the projection, and where my brush is, we're starting to see through to the full version of that projection. Now, just as with the stencil tool, if I hold down the S key, we're going to be able to visualize this projection. So it's using the same keyboard shortcuts. Holding down the S key and the right mouse button up and down will zoom, S key up and down will rotate, and then S key and the middle mouse button will pan. So I can set this projection up the way I would like. Now, I may also want to come over here to my display settings, and here, underneath the viewport settings, we have our hide stencil when painting and our stencil display opacity. So here I might actually increase this just a little bit so I can see what I'm doing here. Now also, we have this projection preview channel. And by default, you can see that, if I hold down the S key here in the viewport, you can see the stencil, and we're previewing that base color channel. However, here in the viewport settings, I can switch this. So let's say that I want to look at the height channel instead. Now I'm viewing that height map. Or if I want to view the ambient occlusion, I'm viewing the ambient occlusion to help me in painting this. In my case, though, the base color channel is going to work the best. So let me close my display settings here. Now I'm going to come over, I'm going to grab my dirt brush, control key, right mouse button, and drag all the way up so that I could set the hardness for the alpha. And now I can go in and just start to paint, and I'm projecting this entire material that we're working on here. So this is our material. We're projecting the textures across all these channels here onto our mesh. So we can then rotate. We also have our stencil controls. So I may want to just kind of rotate the stencil setting here, and then I can start to paint some more, and so on. Now in this particular case, this is, again, I don't like the color, so I could always come over here to the layer and add a filter to this. And we're going to add that HSL filter, and then I'm going to adjust the hue, and now you can see that that hue adjusts. And so here we'll decrease our saturation a little bit. We'll just kind of set this up the way we had it before. Okay, so now I'm going to come back here to the layer. Actually, I think I'm going to come over here to my display settings and just lower that stencil display opacity so I can get this. And then I can come in and just start to play around here with my stencil. Let's just rotate, get this in place like I want, and then just start to paint some of this detail in like this. So this is a way for us to start to just paint or project, like I said, a series of channels or textures directly here into a paintable layer. And here we also have this eraser. So here I can just quickly jump over to the eraser. Let's again just grab that dirt preset, and I can start to just kind of erase away some of this here as well. So we can toggle back and forth between our projection tool and our eraser to get the precise kind of edge wear effect or whatever kind of paint detail that we want here. And so the last thing that I wanted to show in this video was how to use the clone tool. So the first thing we're going to do is just, again, create another layer. Now here we have this clone tool, which is here, so I can activate the clone tool. Now, in order to use the clone tool, what we're going to do, like I said, we have our layer. We're going to want to place the layer at the very top of our layer stack. This way we can clone everything underneath of it. And now I'm going to introduce you to a very special blending mode here in Painter called pass-through. So here, for all of the channels that I would like to clone, let's start with base color. I'm going to set that to pass-through. Then I'm going to come over here to my height, and I'm going to set that to pass-through. I'm going to come over here to my roughness channel, set it to pass-through. And then lastly here, my ambient occlusion, we're going to set it to pass through. So now, basically, all of the layers that make up my stack are all going to pass through into this layer that we're going to perform this cloning operation. So I already have my clone tool active, and I'll zoom in. Here in this case, you can see that I'm just still using my dirt brush. Now, if I hold down the V key, this is going to allow me to sample the source area that I would like to clone from. So here I'm just going to hold down the V key and just left click to set my clone. Here you can see this four-corner icon, which denotes the area of that source. If I hold down the control key and right mouse left and right to scale my brush, you can see that that's also going to scale the source area from which I'm going to clone. So I'm going to set my value here. Now I'm going to come over here with my brush, and I'm just going to start to paint to clone from that source. So here you can see that the source is starting to follow along with the brush, and then I'm just doing this cloning operation here. Again, I'll take another sample from this location and just continue to kind of clone this area out like this. Okay, so what's also really interesting about how the clone system works here in Substance Painter is that it's completely non-destructive. So for example, let's say that we have now done our cloning operation. Here, this is our layer. Let's say this is cloning, so we've done some cleanup work after the fact. Let's scroll all the way down here, and let me just set this here to my base color just so I could see the color thumbnails. And here on this base color, let's change the color. So I'm going to come in and change it to, let's say, something like a green here. You'll notice that the area that I have cloned is also being changed. So again, it's completely non-destructive because we're using this special pass-through mode. So if I disable my clone layer, you can see the cloning operation, and that cloning operation, again, any changes I make to the layers below it is going to come along for the ride. So here in this video, we talked about using paint effects, we talked about using the projection tool, as well as the cloning tool, and how they can be used during that fine-tuning detail stage when you're getting close to finalizing your textures.